Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. In today's episode, February 15th, 2022, we are continuing our monitoring of the situation between Russia and Ukraine. And the big question right now, I think, that is on a lot of people's minds is number one, is Vladimir Putin and the Russian armed forces going to cross the border and invade Ukraine? And again, we can't really answer that question as of yet. There are facts on the ground that indicate that that is a very good possibility, and at the same time, there is a possibility that it in fact may not happen. So, what is in all probability right now keeping Vladimir Putin and the Russian general staff from executing a plan to invade the Ukraine? And at this point, I don't believe it's Western sanctions. I don't believe it is being disconnected from SWIFT or any other economic threats or actions that may be taken against Russia. I think the reality is that on the ground, the Russians are unsure of what this war would look like if and when they launch that operation into Ukraine. And I think it is a questionable issue right now that if indeed the Russians invade Ukraine, and let's say hypothetically they do envelop Kiev, and they bring the current Kiev government to its knees, and they capitulate. The simple fact is that does not mean that the rest of the country is going to capitulate. And I think that is the problem right now. That is what is creating this unsureness within the Russian military. I think ideally they would like to see a large scale operation take place in which they conduct an attempted decapitation strike, maybe not necessarily kill the individual leadership of the Ukraine, but create such a havoc and penetrate into the Ukraine so deeply in terms of enveloping Kiev and threatening other major cities, quite possibly making an attempt to cut off Ukraine from the Black Sea, that the current leadership in Kiev would have no choice but to capitulate and acquiesce to any Kremlin demands. Now, they could do that in Kiev. Now, the problem, again, lies in a lot of what these other, some people call them nationalist, right-wing nationalists in the Ukraine that operate mainly in Western Ukraine and other areas of the country as well. Some individuals would call them Ukrainian patriots. Well, whatever you want to call them, that is the issue right now that the Kremlin faces in terms of even if they have a very successful military operation in which they enter Kiev. And again, I don't believe it's going to be a few day operations. I think it's going to have to be a very compelling, robust, aggressive military operation. It's going to take probably the better part of a month to seize Kiev. And again, even if they do that, the probability of these other elements of the Ukrainian military, the territorial defense brigades, and groups that had operated within the sphere of the anti-Russian movement in terms of fighting in the eastern separatist areas. Those are the individuals that the Kremlin is very concerned with. They are simply unsure. Again, even if they are able to take Kiev or whatever objectives that they have to seek a capitulation, well, they may get that on the surface, but there's nothing saying that a lot of military units in Ukraine, a lot of these territorial defense brigades or whatever these nationalist battalions and regiments that start to sprout up are going to heed those orders from Kiev. And a lot of these units are right now receiving some very advanced weapon systems from the West. I mean, we're talking Stinger anti-aircraft systems being brought in. We're seeing all kinds of anti-tank guided weapon systems, from javelins to in-laws to things we don't even, or we aren't really even aware of, that may have crossed the border right now into Ukraine. So again, that is the issue right now for, I think, Russia. Again, I think they're fairly confident in their military strategy, but then what comes next? There's a high probability that even with the political defeat and the political acquiescence of the current leadership inside of Kiev, that does not mean the rest of the Ukrainian military is going to lay down its arms. It doesn't mean that the Ukrainian civilian population that militarizes is going to lay down its weapons. On the contrary, they're probably going to take up the hunting rifle, the AK-47, and they're probably going to resist the Russians in some fashion. And again, harken back to 2014, the Maidan, the Orange Revolution, and those individuals that came out in force are probably going to do that again, but this time those folks are going to arm themselves. And that is the equation that the Kremlin is currently unsure of. Again, they could probably force political acquiescence, but again, that does not mean that the military formations in the Ukraine, both irregular and regular, are going to honor those commands from Kiev. They're probably going to continue to fight. And I think even if you look at some of the actions by the Ukrainian political apparatus, they're currently increasing the salaries of Ukrainian military personnel via some of these loans from the West, and they're increasing these salaries. And one, that is in hopes that the Russians aren't able to turn some of these units into actually supporting the Russians, but also just kind of to keep their will to fight going, and obviously through compensation and continued compensation, they may continue to do that because they know they have the backing of the West, at least in terms of dollars, euros, what have you, and then obviously military equipment as well. The recent shipments of military equipment that they've been receiving is very important. Now, granted, if the Russians do take large areas of Ukraine, some of these weapon systems fall into the hands of the Russians. Obviously, having javelins that the Russians could possibly reverse engineer or give to the Chinese, even though the Chinese do have a less advanced version of the javelin in production. But some of these other systems that are just a bit more technologically advanced than some of the Russian systems we are seeing. Obviously, that's not good. Getting sidetracked here a little bit, but again, that is what is keeping, at least right now, I believe, the Russians from launching a military operation. And again, it's just the threat of counter military operations, both regular and irregular, that the Russians are going to be facing if they launch a large-scale invasion of Ukraine. That's all we have for now. More to come very, very soon. Have a good day.